Hello. Thank you so much again for attending this Thrift Savings Planning Strategy mid to late career webinar. Either you are pretty excited about attending webinars or you love listening to podcasts. Either way, I'm glad that you have had the opportunity to be able to attend this session and really gather some information that'll be helpful. I'm going to let you know right off the back again. My name is Eric Edwards. Let me first start off by saying that. My name is Eric Edwards. I am one of the financial advisors here at GEBA, which stands for Government Employees Benefits Association. I'm going to review with over the next 59 minutes a ton of information. There will be lots of slides, and you've already been bombarded with a lot of information from previous webinars and sessions. Wanted to try to include information for you to reference. But not every slide will be discussed in great detail. But I want to make certain also that you realize that this is not a recommendation. The information that I'm providing is based on general guidance, and as you are seeking specific recommendations for your specific financial situation, I would encourage you to speak with a financial advisor. And if you don't have a financial advisor that you care and trust, who also is familiar with your federal retirement benefits, definitely reach out to GEBA. That's what we've been doing for over 65 years and counting. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this. Again, as I said, my name is Eric Edwards. I've been with GEBA Wealth Management now for well over 5 years, been in the financial services industry for over 20 years. And my focus here is really to make certain that you get the help that you need. And I find a great passion in doing that. I've been doing that for many years. For those of you who don't know who or what a GEBA is, again, as I may mention, over 65 years ago, we were created actually by the NSA to provide group discounted benefits. We were created by those federal employees to create those benefits for federal employees. At the time, they didn't have access to those group discounted benefits. Since then, we've evolved to a point where we serve over 16,000 federal employees. And that number doesn't even include the number of spouses and children that we help with that. But the focus is we've evolved to become a financial, an educational, and a financial planning resource for all federal employees and trusting us to provide this information to you. All right. Okay. Now, as we're considering going into the discussion of your thrift savings plan, I'd like to really first focus on a quote from a well-known person. Gentleman's name is Warren Buffett. Many of you are pretty familiar with him. One of the greatest investors of our time. Something that he states is that to invest successfully over time doesn't require a stratospheric IQ or really any sort of unusual business insights or inside information. What is needed is sound intellectual framework for making decisions and the ability to keep these emotions from corroding that framework. So ultimately what that's meaning is that we really want to focus on what the purpose is, the mission of our saving. You buy a car to drive you to work, but you wouldn't buy that car to drive you to Japan or to another country, so to speak, if you're traveling across seas. So the focus is really to not allow emotions to interrupt that. Not allow all of the outside forces from focusing and really causing an impact with your investing. Especially in times like this, that could be pretty challenging. We're seeing some volatility that may be occurring, or we may be reflecting on volatility that's happened in years past. And in this slide here, we're reflecting on the blue representing the upside of the market, the stock market, and then the red representing the downsides. As one could see, the downsides are not as often or not as robust as the upside. So, but that's to go to say really that there's not any sort of way that we could forecast the market, but the key thing is over the long term that there are more upside than downsides, which really leads us to focusing on staying invested in the market and the value of staying invested. Picture a house that you would have maybe that would, in essence, you end up making a decision to sell a house at half the value. If the house is worth 400,000, but you sell it for 200,000, I mean, what kind of sense does that make? Well, the same situation is here, especially if it's a house that you don't need to move out of, at least for another 10 or 15 years. If you're not looking to access those funds until maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years out, you could see through this illustration that that yellow line is if a person were to, say, move their money from the C fund into the G fund, an all stock portfolio into cash. And if they kept it there for the remaining period, they could really miss out on on a lot of growth opportunity. Even after 1 year, there's still a considerable amount of missing out on a lot of that growth potential. So there's really a focus, a strong focus should really be placed on staying invested for the time period and really considering, when am I seeking to use this money in retirement? That's really a big key. Again, here we're looking at a scenario where the probabilities of having growth over the long term can be on your side if you can stay focused on your goal and strive to keep the emotions out. Even the savvy investors get kind of tied up into the emotional piece, but the whole key thing is to really pull that back, because in looking at things, the longer that a person can remain invested, and even in this situation where we're looking at 60% of a portfolio being in stocks and 40% within a bond or a conservative aspect, that looking at the various downturns in the market that have happened over several years, there can prove to pay out in dividends if a person remains committed to his or her goal. See, basically the value of the stock market, if you're considering, again, the longer from looking at the first line, that top line, all the way down to the third line, there's a consideration that over a 1 year period, you're going to feel more impact and see it more if you're focused on it month after month after month. But let's say if you're looking at 5 or 10 years out, considering that there's time for the market to be able to recover, then there's opportunity to be able to not even really reflect back on those, I guess you could say, grown zone pains that you might have felt or experienced as you're looking at things month after month. Retirement savings is not focused on a sprint. It's a marathon, and we really need to keep that into perspective in order to help to tame the emotions a little bit. Again, another effort here with the stock market, and considering an all stock portfolio, the S&P 500 is basically what the C fund is based off of, and you could see with even having the volatility over the course of these years that are noted, that the market continued to rise, and statistically there has been a situation where there hasn't been a 10-year period where 10 years out that the stock market was actually lower than 10 years prior. So it really is, the focus is to hone in on what your goals are and not really be as concerned about these short-term corrections, unless, of course, your goals change. And that's, again, when speaking with a financial advisor would make sense. So if in essence you have a 10-year time horizon, but that 10-year time horizon may end up being shortened to a 1 or 2 year, and you may start to need to use those funds within that 2 year period as opposed to 10 or 15 years out, that's when you want to start kind of looking. But realistically speaking, if you're considering another 5 or 10 or 15 years when you're going to start to use the funds, it really makes a great deal of difference to stay committed, stay invested. Again, here, we're talking, and when I make mention of emotions, the biggest thing is fear. I mean, fear and anxiety, and we all have it at different levels. We all have different stresses in life that outside of investing can cause stress between family, jobs, just things that are happening within the society. And then you have the investments having these challenges. We have to really kind of identify what our fear level is, what our anxieties are. And it really would make a big difference in identifying that now. The key thing is identifying that and then striving to make our investments that are going to be based on our time horizon, but also considering any sort of anxieties or fear that we may be feeling along the way. All right, so touch the basic, just a high level overview of just investing in general. Now we'll get into the information in relationship to the various topics as far as the importance of retirement planning, your federal retirement benefits. We're going to skim over that pretty quick, pretty high level, and then we'll talk about the TSP program and the various aspects of it. But now overall, again, just leaning back on retirement savings or just savings in general, the focus you'd want to really kind of think of is how you imagine living life in retirement, and really even bigger, which this may be too big to think about right now, but it's something that one should constantly reflect on, is how do you think your thrift savings plan will play a role in that retirement? Is it going to be a paycheck where you're going to need to withdraw money from it on a monthly basis, or might it be a play check? Now, how much or how little is in there and how expensive or how frugal your lifestyle is, that's all going to play a role. Whether you have a spouse who may be a homemaker, or maybe she or he may also have a full-time job, they may be a federal employee, all these things play a factor. But the real key is kind of what the purpose of this money is for, and then how it's going to be used in order for you to help you to meet your goals. All right, so the beauty of it is that being federal employees, you have access to one of the several pension plans, whether it's FERS or CSRS or the CSRS offset opportunity. So you have that in addition to Social Security. So a lot of that helps you to really insulate, depending on what your lifestyle looks like. There may not be a need to lean on that thrift savings plan as much. But nonetheless, you do have your thrift savings plan, your IRAs. If any of you have any individual retirement accounts, whether they be traditional or Roth, if you are if this is a second or third career working with the federal government, you might have an old 401k or 403b or 457. Those are all employer-sponsored plans like the Thrift Savings Plan. They function in a little bit of different ways, but those opportunities can be at your disposal in addition to that TSP maybe. Then there's also there could be some retirement annuities that also may be out there if you worked with the state or maybe with a company that might have offered an additional pension plan. You'd have that available to you. Then there are some non-retirement investments. People don't look at savings accounts as being investments a lot, but that is a big deal. And I would really encourage, especially at this time, to really make certain that you have at least 6 months of your monthly expenses within that account. Really identify what your expenses are, have that there. You may have some CDs, and then there may be some taxable accounts that you may have, and taxable stocks or mutual funds that aren't within an actual retirement account. And then there could be also non-qualified annuities. But all those pieces could play a role in your retirement situation, and it shouldn't be looked at as separate segments, because they all work towards making that retirement engine move smoothly, depending on how efficient you make that plan. Okay. Now, as you look at all of those pieces of your retirement toolkit, so to speak, then you want to consider as far as like who this money is going to be for, as far as benefiting. It could just be yourself, but if it's a spouse, then you have to really evaluate how that money is going to be used, how you access your benefits, how you invest. All those play a role, and you're going to be quite honestly spending about as much time in retirement, probably 20 or 30 years in retirement as you have in the workforce. So it really makes a difference to really focus on considering that this is not a point in time. It's a period in time, a transition, a life event that you'll that may be constantly evolving as the years progress. And then considering, people look at longevity and the factor, thinking of break-even points and things of that nature. At this point, at this stage in your life, you're at a scenario where if you're approaching age 65, then your probability of living into your 80s and maybe even your 90s has increased much more than, say, the 20-year-olds that are doing crazy things like driving fast or all of the other things that happen to kids when they're young. This is a situation that really needs to be considered, seeing as that the longer that we live, then sometimes the more healthcare costs may be, there may be other expenses, cost of living, taxation, lots of things that one should consider. So when we're looking at our Thrift Savings Plan, and people always ask, well, how much should I save? I'll say, quite honestly, you save as much as you can. As much as you can could mean different for a lot of people. You see the rule of thumb that's being listed on the screen. However, you have to kind of do what's best for you. I would say, at the minimum, 5%, because at least, and we'll talk about this later on, that, that's as much as what the TSP or the federal government will match. If you can't do anything less than, if you can't do any more than 5% because you have other expenses in your life, that's fine. No, don't beat yourself up. But if you have other expenses taken care of and you've got more than enough money, then you want to, that's going out, and you want to invest it to really use that, have that for future use, then by all means, take advantage of the contribution opportunities that you have available. All right. Because the bottom line is the time value of money, it really will pay off exponentially. And here we have Don and Dave. You see where Don had started really saving 10 years earlier than Dave. And although they were saving the same amount, that 10 years of earlier savings provided, again, an exponential return for her, which if a person has the capability of doing that, you take advantage of that opportunity. And even, even now, if in fact, let's say you felt like you might not have put in as much as you would have liked to, the best thing to do is to evaluate that. Take a look. If you feel comfortable doing that yourself, then great. Otherwise, reach out to Giba and we can help to provide you that financial guidance, a complimentary financial review. But the bottom line is really retirement savings is your priority. You really want to focus on considering the fact that you can take a loan out for education. You can take a loan out for a car. You can take a loan out for a house, but you can't take a loan out for retirement. That's the bottom line. And if you're seeking to have a retirement that could provide you a rich and healthy or prosperous time during those years, then the goal would be to really make a concerted effort to try to make the decisions that are going to be beneficial long term. And a lot of times that one, again, emotions will get caught up, but there's a need to kind of put those in check. All right. So now, considering the federal pension benefits, again, we talked about FERS, CSRS, and the CSRS offset. Depending on your pension opportunity, one thing is for certain, all three of you have the capability of contributing to your thrift savings plan. Although FERS is the only one that gets a match to that, and it only matches the first 5% of a person's salary. Even though that is the case, that's still not a reason to take advantage of saving for retirement, because again, it's what type of lifestyle do you want to live? The income that you receive now while you're working, quite honestly, might not be the amount that you get as your pension with your pension, but depending on your pension and Social Security and other investments, you might be able to get as close to that. So really the goal is not to, scrimp and live outside of a paper bag or anything. The whole focus is to prepare yourself for any of the cost of care that you might need, anything that money might be instrumental to helping you to acquire during those retirement years. All right. So again, having the capability of being a federal employee, regardless of what you have, and you have a lot more insulation from what happens a lot of times with the general stock market. So unless you have a pretty extravagant lifestyle, you're not going to need to lean on your thrift savings plan for every single expense that you have. You have that pension available to you. And for the majority of you on this webinar, you have access to the first plan, which gives you the pension, Social Security, and TSP. Now, if you're CSRS, you may not have that. Now, granted, there could be some opportunity with the new laws changing that there may still be some Social Security income coming into play. But the key thing is you really want to focus on understanding how these pieces of the puzzle can play a role to your success. All right, so looking deeper into the Thrift Savings Plan. Again, we talked about it being an employer-sponsored plan that Congress created for federal employees, and it gives you the opportunity that, again, for FERS employees, that you have the capability of making these contributions. Now, as of 2020, they were automatic. So there were people that prior to 2020 weren't making any contributions at all to the Thrift Savings Plan, but now there is an automatic contribution that does go into, to effect, so that it kind of really helps. It helps to kind of kickstart that savings capability. Under age 50, you can contribute up to $23,500. Don't beat yourself up if you're not. But if you have 6 months of money in an emergency fund and you're wondering, well, what should I do with some of this additional money, and you're not contributing into your thrift savings plan, that's something you should be doing. Again, for individuals over 50, the same thing would apply to you as well. In many cases, if you don't have an emergency fund that's set up, 6 months of your monthly expenses in a savings account, and you're making contributions that are higher than at 5%, then you probably may want to consider to reduce, at least do that 5%, build up the emergency fund. But then once the emergency fund is built up, go back and start putting that money back into the thrift savings plan, because you can contribute up to $31,000. There's, and there's even other opportunities that you could consider as you get closer to retirement. The key thing is to speak with a tax advisor, as well as to reach out to a financial advisor. That's where Giba comes in, and we can help with that. All right. So again, looking at the contributions. Now, traditional refers to a pre-tax contribution. So the benefit of that is that the contributions that are made are going to be basically reducing your reportable income during the year that the contribution is made. Now, on the flip side, at the time of distribution, you would be paying taxes, and you would be paying taxes on 100% of that distribution, at whatever your tax rate is at that time. But the great part is that you are able to defer, to distribute it later, take advantage of compounding growth. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and really, whether you decide on doing pre-tax to focusing on the other aspect, which would be Roth, that really depends on how you would see really moving forward with taxation in your life. It's like the benefit with the Roth, you have a great opportunity here where you pay the taxes up front. So although it doesn't reduce your tax, your reportable income in the year that you make the contribution, the really cool part about it is that you're able to contribute this money at, basically that after-tax contribution, and then that contribution gets to grow tax deferred. So you get still the same tax deferred growth, only the difference is you pay the taxes in the year that you made the contribution. And then once you do take out that distribution, that contribution, now it's going to end up being 100% tax free. So that's pretty awesome. If you're looking at that, basically getting 100% of 100%. Now, the thing to keep in mind is, as I may mention, when you're making that contribution, you're going to be making that, you can make at least that, whether it's 5% of a Roth or 5% of a traditional, you would still be matched by the thrift savings plan, but they're only going to match it from a pre-tax perspective. They do not max, they won't max it as a Roth. So the pre-tax piece, obviously, that will have to be taxed at the point of distribution. However, your Roth contribution and any growth that Roth contribution makes, that's going to be tax-free at the time of distribution. So it's pretty cool with that. And how that could be of a benefit is really when it comes to what your life looks like in retirement, whether it's considering your spouse and her tax bracket situation at the point of you passing, or if you're looking to do some cool things like maybe legacy planning, and if you have, maybe you want to pass funds over to non-spousal beneficiaries that and really reduce the tax liability. There's a lot of things to consider. Take a look and use this slide as a reference for some options, but I'd really advise you to speak with a tax advisor to make certain that you're doing the right thing for you. All right, so I keep making mention of this 5%. So in essence, if you as far as in order to not leave any money on the table, you don't want to leave any TSP money on the table. The goal is to make a minimum of 5% contribution of whatever your salary is, and if you do that per pay period, then you would be able to get that match pretty much dollar for dollar. And the goal is to really spread that contribution amount. I made mention of for individuals under age 50 that you have the capability of being able to make contributions in order to take advantage of that match will happen every pay period up to the point that you have received, you've either you've either got to December 31st, or that you have met the whatever the actual amount is for the contribution. So in this situation, again, we're looking based on 2025 figures and 23,500 for individuals under age 50. You have Sean and Susan, and both are making contributions into their plan. The difference is Susan spread them out over the course of the 26 pay periods that she has a capability of doing so. Sean, he actually kind of front loaded it. And the challenge is, if you look as in that column on the left, because he front loaded it and made contributions much higher, it ended up he missed out on 3 pay periods where he could have received additional matching. So that's something to really be conscious of. The Thrift Savings Plan website will be able to guide you with that. And you can also call the TSP hotline, and they'll be able to walk you through the process. Okay, so again here, looking at the importance of the Thrift Savings Plan. And if we're considering the 3-legged stool that's often being referred to, in this situation, we've got Sam, and looking at his pension and Social Security benefit, just between the Social Security and the pension benefit, that comes up to about $65,000 a year. So now, with that being the case, if you add a potential income that he could be receiving as far as taking distributions from his Thrift Savings Plan, he could be able to successfully draw income that would allow him to have a total of spendable income of about $100,000 a year. And the key thing is really, again, identifying what, if there's a need to spend that money, how you would want to spend it. Not saying you've got to scrape and scrape and maybe hoard money, but the focus is to really know what your expenses are, knowing how your expenses are going to increase, knowing what things may need to be covered. Like if you haven't purchased a long-term care policy, if that's something that is out of, not within your plan, then it's probably going to be something that you're going to be tapping into in order to cover those expenses. And if you have a long-term care plan, then that would allow you to not use this money as much, which could mean that maybe you might just use it for traveling or pass it on as a legacy to your kids. There's lots of opportunities, but it's all about identifying and knowing what's going on within your individual financial plan, how comfortable you are with it, how efficient it is. Those are keys. Now, again here, looking at, going back to the contributions between Roth and traditional. The Roth and traditional contributions, not much of a difference. It is if you're really living, if things are tight, $200 can mean a lot if you're making Roth contributions as opposed to doing pre-tax contributions. You end up getting more in retirement, but in the short term, it may feel like you're getting less. So the key thing is really feeling confident with knowing that do you want the tax deduction now so that you could have more income available to you? Or would you prefer to have, as you see with Regina's side now, although she did kind of sacrifice, in essence, bringing home less money during her working years, she ended up having more spendable income in retirement. All right. How do you change your contributions? That's something that you can go ahead and update through your government retirement benefit system. We definitely reach out to your HR coordinator for details on that. But you have the capability of making those contributions. If you wanted to transfer investments between accounts, if you want to move money out of those accounts, any of those things can be done here through your TSP website and definitely consulting with the TSP hotline or with a financial advisor who is familiar with your federal retirement benefits. They can help you with doing that. All right. So the TSP investments. Here we are. We're looking at the risk versus reward. You see the various individual funds and the areas in which the higher in this triangle, the more aggressive that an investment could be. However, the more growth potential that it could provide. Now, this may show a little bit of a different scenario when you're looking at it with the L funds, because and we'll talk about that later on. But you really want to consider your risk tolerance, the time horizon. So you're thinking about how comfortable are you with the amount of volatility or the amount of aggressive nature that stocks could have in relationship to bonds. But that's but if you feel shaky, then there's really some further conversation that you need to have. But we also want to think, okay, am I saving for 5 years down the road, or am I saving for 10 years down the road, or am I going to be working for another 15 to 20 years? These are things to consider. There's no perfect place to be. The whole key thing is to really understand what you're comfortable with, how long you're looking to invest, and what combination of investments, what combination of funds might it take in order to help you to reach that level of comfortability. Okay, so asset allocation. So the mix of the various the assets being those funds that are within the Thrift Savings Plan. So you just imagine the Thrift Savings Plan being a vehicle that the government allows you to drive. Now you have certain types of engines. You can put certain components within that TSP vehicle that you can use as the engine to drive the growth, and that's where the stocks come into play. Or there could be bonds. So you have that the bond element stock is going to have a little bit of growth and could have some loss. Stocks are going to have much greater growth potential, but could have greater loss. And then there's the cash element, which is something that there isn't any sort of volatility, but there may be ups and downs with the growth of what's happening within the account. So speaking of the money market and cash, the G fund, where everyone many folks, maybe not any of you, but what many folks tend to run to when the market starts to turn, even though they're not looking to use their money for 5 or 10 years, moving the money into this account. Forecasting the weather is like, forecasting the weather and forecasting the economy, the stock market. It's almost like synonymous. Like, who can always get it 100% right? In this situation here, you're looking at the G fund, which is like a glorified money market. It does give an opportunity that it doesn't have the volatility that the other investments have on paper. However, what it does have is purchasing power risk. What it also has is an inflation risk, because it does have growth potential, which you see here that within the last year, the rate was 4.49% within the last 12 months. But since inception, 4.65% when inflation's at 3%. If a person's not looking to use 100% of their thrift savings plan within the next year or two, it might not be of a benefit to have all of that money within that realm. So really want to evaluate what you're looking to do and how that could play a role in your life. The F fund, that's the bond component. And here you're seeing, and of course, all this information, you can reference the TSP website and check the performance here. What you're seeing is an opportunity where, yes, the last 12 months rates have been pretty good for within the F fund. As interest rates go up, then the value of the F fund would go down. But as rates go down, then the value goes up. Now, we've had over the past 2 years, there had been several increases. So that it proves to show positive within this last year. However, considering the 3, 5, 10-year run, it really hasn't proven to be as beneficial. You definitely want to consider having a conservative element to your portfolio. However, it's not always feasible within this realm. So to have all of your eggs in this basket could prove to be pretty detrimental over the long term. Maybe a portion, but not the entire amount. Okay, the C fund. C fund, basically a loose equivalent of the S&P 500. And as you can see, looking at the as far as the benchmark to the right of the S&P 500, I mean, pretty much is in lock, stock, and barrel with that. You have an opportunity where there can be great growth potential. However, there's definitely a consideration that if you're considering retiring over the next 2 to 3 years and having an entire stock portfolio, how would that, if this money is going to be used as a monthly expense to cover monthly expenses, how beneficial is it keeping all of that within that one stock portfolio? Because in 2008, it did take a 38.65% drop. But that's not to say that it's still not of a valuable benefit. Again, we have to kind of go back to the reference of the house. Is it a house that I need to sell now? And sell means basically using that money in retirement. But if you move your money from this account into an account when it's down and you've got 5 or 10 years to go, you pretty much sold the house. So the whole key is really, well, I keep saying the key. There's a whole lot of keys here, but I'll say that if we're focusing on really what the plan is, it's stick to the plan, take the emotion out of it. And if you really feel like there's a need to make some changes, then you really evaluate what your life, what you're going to be doing and how this money is going to play a role in your life. Here's the S fund, which can be have some greater spikes. However, has also a lot more volatility. Can be beneficial as a part of an overall portfolio, but might not be the place to put all the eggs. Again, there's no perfect place. The whole key is to really understand where you need to be in order to provide the growth potential over the long term that you're seeking. The I fund provides an international stock focus, and this is primarily in the developed nations. So here you've got a scenario where it's much lower than the growth potential that has been happening within the C fund. However, within, as you might have seen, within some certain months, international markets may outperform domestic markets, which is a benefit for having asset allocation. And speaking of asset allocation, there's a lot of people that are listening right now, a lot of people that are watching this and thinking, I love making the decision of where I put, which funds I use. And if you love doing that, that's great. My hat off to you. But then there's many of you who may either they don't have a stomach for it, or perhaps they think they could, but they're just too busy with life. They've got kids, they've got soccer, they've got, whatever, charity commitments. They don't know what's going on, but they know they have to invest, and they know that they should invest toward a time frame that's going to benefit them. And that's exactly where the L funds come into play. And the L funds were designed initially in the private sector. They were designed initially focused on the year closest to when a person was going to start taking Social Security. That's the true time, not when a person was actually separating from their place of business, because that didn't necessarily mean that was when they were going to start using the money. The reason why I say that is because as time progresses, the closer that a person gets to the year in which she or he is going to retire, if they end up selecting this type of investment for that year, but they don't touch it for 10 years out, that money is going to become more conservative. These L funds are highly instrumental in providing that asset allocation and reallocation. They take a mixture of all of those individual funds and they formulate it so that they have the more aggressive growth in the earlier years, the farther the years out, and then the closer it gets to the time when that year is coming. Say, an example, 2030. 2030, the closer we get to 2030, the more conservative that those investments are going to become. So you really want to identify when you're planning, when you think you may be using the funds in retirement, or at least focus on age 67 or the time in which you're going to be using that money and within retirement, if you're going to start taking distributions. All right. So now for those of you who may want to delve into areas outside of the standard Thrift Savings Plan options, there is a mutual fund window, which does require certain eligibility requirements to be met in order for you to take advantage of that. So I would say, you can definitely reference these next few slides, really focusing, and understanding that there's a $55 annual administrative fee, $95 annual maintenance fee. There are trade fees, and there's other fees to really be conscious of. So if you want to take advantage of the cost-effective area, you really need to evaluate that. There's also other requirements as far as the amount of money that should be in it, as well as money that you move in and out of the Thrift Savings Plan. All right, so let's talk about the withdrawal elements here. Within these withdrawals, you have options to do either a withdrawal in service, so meaning while you're still working, or you can do one in retirement. And retirement would mean, for anyone who separates at any particular time, if you've actually, retired from federal service here. So in-service withdrawals, that refers to you're basically active federal employees. If you're continuing to work and you are at the age or over the age of 59 and a half, here are the guidelines and parameters that would be available to you, that you have the capability of taking withdrawals. Depending on how you take that withdrawal, could be a subject to penalty. So like if you were thinking, I want to take a loan, you could also think, okay, all right, hopefully you're not leaning on the Thrift Savings Plan as a means to be like a bank, so to speak. But if in fact you needed to, you wanted to pull some funds out to take care of some things, you'd have the capability to doing that even while you're working, and it would not impact your Thrift Savings Plan status. But again, you would have to be over the age of 59 and a half. You have 4 withdrawals per year that you can take advantage of. All right. So again, depending on the type of withdrawal, it could be taxable. Distributions made directly payable to the individual are taxable. All right. If there is a loan that is not repaid, if a person separates, then that would be taxable. But then if you're transferring money from one custodian to another, such as doing an IRA transfer, or you're moving, or let's say you end up leaving and you take your thrift savings plan and you want to put it into another employer sponsored plan, you could make that transfer and that would not be a taxable event. But if you have money in this account and you end up, let's say you're living in retirement, you're taking withdrawals, the required minimum distributions, if it's from a traditional IRA, then that would, obviously it's going to be taxed. All right. So TSP loans, again, you have the opportunity to be able to take TSP loans, and the TSP loan, you have the capability of repaying it. If in fact, at the worst case scenario, if there's a dire need to basically borrow from your retirement, because in essence, one could think, yes, you could be thinking you're borrowing from yourself, but you're also delaying the growth of that money that you had, that you actually have invested. So that's something to really consider if you're going to make that decision. Required minimum distributions, again, if they're traditional IRAs, traditional IRAs have required minimum distributions. All traditional money inside of an employer sponsored plan, thrift savings plan included, does have a time frame and is going to be separate. So if you have an outside traditional IRA that you're taking required minimum distributions from, that does not satisfy the required minimum distribution that you take from your TSP. Speak with your financial advisor or reach out to GIBA so we can help you with that guidance if needed. All right, so again, talking about the distributions, a direct rollover. If a person's doing a direct rollover, that's a trustee to trustee or custodian to custodian transfer of retirement assets. That would, so basically, in essence, that money would be moved for the benefit of you, the individual, from one institution into another institution. So in essence, instead of the vehicle that the federal government lets you drive, that's your money, you put it into a vehicle that's yours, that will be your money. You get to drive. You can do that, you self-direct that IRA, or if you have a financial advisor. The key thing is, if you don't know how to do a direct rollover, reach out to a financial advisor or the financial institution that you're working with, and they can help you with doing that. Now, if you wanted to do an indirect rollover, you can do that. However, that could, that's basically meaning a distribution that you would take from the thrift savings plan. That's going to be subject to taxation. There's a 60-day window for that, and it's really important that you adhere to that, or it could cause further tax complications. Just recommend not doing that. That's the one recommendation I will say, in addition to making certain that you have an emergency fund at all times. Okay, so managing the contributions here, reviewing your contributions is important. As I went back, I shared with you earlier between the two individuals that were making those contributions. You want to make certain that you're making contributions so that you're getting all the matching portions that you're seeking, and then focus on also evaluating your allocation, the mix of funds that you're using within the TSP portfolio. You want to make certain that you're managing that risk is managed based upon your time horizon. That's really a key in identifying, really harvesting gains, or at least putting your funds in the position to be prepared for the transition in the next part of your life. All right, so making changes, you have the opportunity to be able to make those changes. The TSP website will be at your disposal. One of the biggest things you want to make certain of, and something a lot of people may tend to forget, is updating beneficiaries and making certain that your beneficiary listing is up to date. You have the right information, and then, because the key thing is, if there's no beneficiary listed, then there could be some scenarios where that may end up getting put up in your state, and then beneficiaries would have to go through various loops in order to be able to acquire those assets. So you want to make certain it's going to be a smooth transfer. That's the key. And then, really, as it stands, looking at your overall portfolio, looking at that thrift savings plan, do not look at it as one aspect. You have to look at every single component, and it's a part of that overall retirement savings, that financial portfolio that will carry you, be the vehicle that guides you into your future years. Really considering expenses, you have to also consider your growth potential within your investments. You want to consider how the money's invested, how long it's invested. And really the biggest thing is to consider removing the emotions and selling out at a time that might not be conducive for your overall financial plan. It's like, don't get in your way. Because a lot of times we let ourselves get in the way of the progress that we hope to attain. And if we're on track, especially if we feel confident that we're on track, then you need to stay the course. If the plan was designed for a 15 or 10-year time horizon, if you're not going to touch this money until your required minimum distribution age, if you're looking to have this for the longer term, then we need to think long term. All right. And so again, making those contributions is another thing to consider as you're managing your thrift savings plan. Again, people get kind of spooked when there are, when things are good, everyone wants to contribute. But when things are bad, then people start making rash decisions. And the key thing is to really not to focus on the short term, not looking at the sprint, but considering the marathon that you're running. Okay, so now I've brought up this information, although this isn't about specifically the deferred resignation, because this, things are happening. We really need to kind of highlight this. And of course, GIBA serves. We're not a federal agency. Again, we were created by federal employees. We are a not-for-profit organization. However, because our financial advisory team holds designations to, that helps us to understand your federal employee benefits. We do have some knowledge in this, and so that we can provide you with some guidance throughout this. And this deferred resignation at one time had actually been wrapped up February the 9th, but then it sounds like it's beginning to resurface in a lot of different places. And so there's definitely something to be knowledgeable and conscious of. And then if you have additional questions and you're not getting help from your from OPM or from HR coordinator, you have a benefits coordinator that'll be able to assist you. Feel free to reach out to GIBA, and we can provide you some guidance on at least what your financial situation would be, regardless of what decision has to be made or you decide on making with regard to that. All right. So again, looking at, the deferred resignation is talking about working. You continue and have the same income. You may be home, but then you end up in essence deferring your retirement to September 30th. There may be others who have been hearing things with relationship to other reductions in force that might not be of a voluntary scenario, because the deferred resignation is often voluntary. Then there's other reduction of force that might be where you don't get the opportunity to defer that. You may have a few months. The key thing is to really identify, knowing how many years of service, because you know how many years of service and because your situation, there are guidelines and information on the OPM website that can help you to understand what's going on, to be able to navigate through that. But the key thing is, when you're considering, if we're looking specifically at the deferred resignation does provide the full retirement, unreduced pensions, and then it would give you an opportunity to basically retire with one of the various scenarios. So with the early out, this VERA scenario, you could have at least 20 years, be age 50, or you could have 25 years of service at any age. The opportunity will be where you wouldn't be able to take another civilian job, another civilian federal job, but you would be, but there could be other opportunities that you might be able to take advantage of. So I would just say read the fine print for that. But there would be no reduction in your annuity if, in fact, you do end up taking this VERA prior to age 55. Now, the one thing to really be considerate about is with the TSP, specifically, individuals who separate under the age of 55 will not have access to her or his TSP at all. If you separate after age 55, then you have full access. And when I say access, that means that you would not be able to take a single distribution. There could be other things that you would have the capability of doing, but it would not be for like a single distribution as far as a payment to maybe make a house note for 1 month or 2 months. However, so going back to the VERA though, you would have your coverage, your federal employee health benefits. Shouldn't be any change with that, as well as you'd be able to continue with your federal employee group life insurance. All right, so if you're not provided the voluntary early out, then there's an opportunity. There's several other opportunities that you would have available to you with relationship to separating, and that could be postponing retirement. Let's take a look at this here. This information would be available to you, whereby, so depending on whether it's a postponement of retirement or if you deferred the retirement. Now, the key thing is really making certain that you have the opportunity of understanding what that is really like outlining how many years of service you have, how old you are, what benefits you need, and what you can carry and what you can't carry. So here's a nice grid for you to be able to reference that will share the information that you would have available to you. And regardless of what's going on, you can always lean on GIBA. GIBA's here to help and serve as your advocate, helping you to navigate this financial journey. And if the decision is that you have to, or you are seeking to separate from your federal employee workforce, we can provide you with a complimentary financial review. All of you that are listening, if you're GIBA members, you're automatically qualified. If you're not a GIBA member, but you're a federal employee, you are a qualifying member. And that gives you the opportunity to be able to take advantage of a complimentary, no cost, no obligation financial review, as we do offer a lot of support to all federal employees. We have a team of licensed advisors who can provide you with this guidance. We'll take the time, review your income, your expenses, your assets, liabilities. However, the goal is to develop a comprehensive understanding of your financial situation so that we can provide you with suitable, sound, efficient recommendations. If you're on the right path, we'll be the first ones to tell you. However, if there are some things that could make your financial plan more efficient, then we can provide you with that guidance. So in addition to that financial review, we have a slew of financial services and solutions, many of which we've been working as far as if you look at the insurance aspect, these solutions, 80% of them are portable, meaning that after you've separated from the federal government, you are capable of continuing having access to them, and you wouldn't miss a beat. So the opportunity is there and available to you, and it's really all up to you If you've got the help that you need with your financial advisor, or if you feel like you've got it on your own, then by all means, again, my hat off to you. And for those of you who don't feel like you have everything lined up the way that you would hope for it to be, or you really want to make certain that you have some sound professional guidance, reach out to Giba. We're here to help. Thank you again for attending the webinar. Wishing you guys the very best. Take care and have a great day.